Hello, welcome to another episode on People Ops Playbook. My name is Vara, and I'm your host of this People Ops Playbook, where we talk about practical tools, frameworks, and real life examples to share all the trends that are happening in the industry and help you create amazing workplaces. Today's episode is all about HR and employment law essentials. This is a very important topic that every single HR business leader, CEO needs to know about in order to stay compliant and not get sued and so on. So, in order to talk about this topic, I have Halisi Tambuzi. Halisi is a founder of Workplace Investigations, and he has over a decade of experience in this HR and employment law. He has customized over 800 handbooks, answered thousands of compliance questions, and led complex workplace investigations across industries. He focuses on helping leaders and employees understand what legal protection truly means day to day, translating the policy language into like real world application. And that's what I'm super duper excited about because we're going to talk about a lot of scenarios, practical examples, what's happening across industries, what are those common legal blind spots, pillars, elements that we need to be aware of in order to stay compliant. How do we resolve a workplace conflict better, and so on. There's so much we're going to talk about in this episode that has crucial knowledge that every single HR needs to know about. So yeah, to I want to welcome Halisi. Thank you so much for joining me on this call. I'm super duper excited for this.
Thank you, Vara. Thank you for having me. I'm excited as well.
Awesome. So let's get dive into this. A company wants to do an HR health check. What are those key legal pillars or elements they should review first to know whether they are compliant or not?
Excellent question. Thank you for asking. From the start, when an employer or a founder they're doing a health check on their business, one of the primary things that they want to be aware of is their employee count. Now, those things can shift throughout the year. So you're going to hire, you're going to separate from employees. You might hire your kids on, you might get interns. And so that employee count is going to depend on which laws apply to your business. And so oftentimes employers might be on the threshold, might be like on a threshold. You have 12, 13, 14 employees, and then you bring your kids on. The kids, they may not be doing that much, but as small business owners, you start thinking about your kids, you start thinking about showing them a pathway of business, and maybe they're helping out in the business with marketing or taking some photos or something like that. Not realizing that as soon as they become your employee, it increases your employee count. And now you may have a law apply to you that didn't apply before.
Hmm.
And so making sure, so starting off when kind of looking at your, doing a health check for yourself is what's my employee count? How many employees do I actually have on my books? Another area that can be impacted is the independent contractor versus an employee. And so this independent contractor, someone who you are bringing on, they're there to do maybe a project of some sort, or maybe they are doing something, something else within your business. And you think about independent contractors, and the idea there is that these people are truly independent. Once you, as that person, start dictating how they should perform their job, that's more of an employee situation. And that can trigger that worker being considered an employee and not an independent contractor. And so that can increase your employee count overall. And now you may have to comply with a different employment law that you weren't expecting to. And so and so knowing that employee count from the start before you kind of do an audit on yourself, that's going to be pretty critical.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and then the other thing I would say is just which laws apply to your industry is pretty is very important because certain laws aren't going to apply to specific industries. So if you're thinking about being in a healthcare industry, you're going to have confidentiality laws apply more than they're going to be in, say, a construction space. So understanding kind of which laws apply to your particular industry, and you may need some third party consultant, independent contractor to really come in to help you identify, well, which laws apply to my business. That way we can start to understand which ones you are required to comply with. And we can structure the policies around there. Make sure that the compliance first, and then we can structure in, well, the pieces that actually make your business run smoothly.
Mhm. I want to just clarify if this is majorly for US and Canada, would you say?
So yeah, so the right both the US and Canada, they're both going to have these independent contractor
Hmm.
statuses that they're still going to be there. The test might look different. The US might have like a more formalized test than Canada has. And that's where you're going to probably going to see these little bit of differences. And they're still going to have discrimination laws in the US as well as Canada, but they can look differently. And so I'm not hugely knowledgeable about all the specifics in Canada since I'm
Hmm.
based out of the U.S. But I think there are these concepts that we can take and we can understand kind of how they're being looked at within a workplace.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially in the lines of like overall generally, I find it very similar, both in Canada and US, especially how we handle workplace conflict or what are the common employment law issues are coming up. But it's all over similar trends. So I completely agree with you. Um, I do have a follow up question in independent contractor and the employee. So on even though on paper it says legally they're independent contractor, but if we treat them as an employee doing probation reviews, performance reviews, and everything, they would automatically be considered as an employee.
It's not particularly like within the United States. It's not like an automatic that they're considered an employee, but those are pieces, and so you can kind of understand that someone who's independent, who is, yes, that they're taking on a lot of risk. If they get injured, right, they have to cover their own cost. The issue that can come up is when a workplace injury takes place, they may be everyone's on the same page with them being an independent contractor. But then a workplace injury takes place, and that independent contractor may not have the resources to
Mm,
to pay for their medical bills. Those medical bills need to get paid somehow. And that's kind of where the risk comes into play, where now the individual who is hurt is now looking for a way to make sure their medical bills get paid. Essentially, they're looking for money in order to get their medical bills paid, which is completely understandable. And so what can happen there is they take the position, well, yes, I was labeled as an independent
mm,
contractor. However, you have been treating me
mm,
as if I'm an employee. And so some of those ways of treatment would be, well, look at the employee handbook you provided me. Look at the uniform that you provided me. Look at all of this equipment that you have provided me to allow me to perform my job.
yeah.
And so those
Clearly, there's risk.
Yeah. So those are very employee esque things that you would do for an employee, and so that's why it's very critical that you identify what relationship you're trying to have with that individual, with that worker.
Okay, that makes sense. I want to dive into that's following that. I do want to dive into legal blind spots that organizations often miss, and how can businesses can bridge the gap. And so we know, like, okay, these are the common ones that we always have to look out for.
Yeah, there's legal blind spots, and I guess I'll start with a viable claim. I think from an employer standpoint, from a founder standpoint, we always think about as someone suing the business after they've been terminated. Right after they've been terminated or separate from the business, that's when they're able to go ahead and sue the company. And that's not really how it works. A viable claim takes place when the action occurs. So meaning if you if you discriminated against an employee while they're still working there, that employee could still go file a claim and show up to work the next day because
Mm,
the claim is viable. And you can think about how, I don't want to say toxic, but how difficult the relationship is going to be at that point in time when you received the lawsuit from the employee and the employee is still working there, and all of the pieces that go in, all the emotional pieces really that go into having an employee present who is also suing your company. Right, if you give them a task and they don't want to do the task, you can imagine all of the emotional things you're going to feel about
yeah.
them not completing that task that you've assigned them to do. Uh,
Mhm.
Conversely, if the employee is not completing the task that you've asked them to do, and then you try to coach them, that employee is going to feel like, oh, they're coming down harder on me because I filed a suit against them. And so it's very important to making sure that you're managing the employee relationship. And I think that that's why one reason why HR is so important, because
Mhm.
these those particular individuals on your team are helping the relationships between the employees who are helping the product or service move throughout the customer life cycle.
Right.
And so those HR people, while they are, they can get a lot of slack for being overly emotional, but they're dealing with they're dealing with human beings who are helping the company move their product or service along. And there
Mhm.
are real life circumstances that occur that people do need support. And so if you're looking at employees as just numbers essentially, then you're damaging your one of your revenue drivers of your company.
Mhm. That's such an important lesson, honestly, and sounds like a very sensitive situation. I believe no HR, no business leader, no company want to be in that position at all, and it's just so like, okay, what do we do? You know, and I think in the situations where we have to be more proactive and, like you were saying, managing those employee relations. And we're also going to talk about workplace conflicts and how do we resolve that in this episode, which I'm super excited about. And you're hearing more of your thoughts and can we be more proactive in ensuring everybody voice is heard and that we are not neglecting them and then eventually being in a situations that we don't want to be in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to talk about two more areas within these blind spots.
Hmm.
One is hiring, and when doing the hiring, often what happens, right? So the hiring goes through. You see a candidate that you want to provide an offer to, and you give that person an offer letter. And and so what can happen, particularly in, I guess, these times where the uncertainty of being able to find another job, when you kind of go into this job market, what can happen is someone might still be working at one place, at one company, and then they get an offer letter from another company, and in that, kind of that middle area, there's this question of, well, when should I leave? Should I provide 2 weeks notice to my former employer so that I can transition smoothly over to this new company? And sometimes what companies get wrong is that they'll provide the offer letter, and that employee is essentially leaving that former company for this new opportunity, to
Right.
this new company. They're leaving it for this new opportunity. And I've seen situations where in the middle area where they're leaving for this opportunity, they've given their 2 weeks notice, they're leaving, and then the new company informs them we're withdrawing the offer. And so now that employee doesn't have their former job and they don't have a new job. And it's a very scary scenario to be in. The employee is thinking, "Hey, I communicated to my former employer. I tried to do it correctly. I gave them 2 weeks notice, and I was transitioning over. And now you're telling me that is not, there's no room for me at this new place of new company." And so employers don't know the legal risks that can cause. And while and so the legal risk that can come into place is that this employee has committed based on what's called a reasonable reliance. They've reasonably relied on this new position in order to
Mhm.
leave what they had. And what they
Mhm.
had was a consistent 2 weeks of pay that was coming in. And now they no longer have that because they relied on you.
Yeah.
And it's this concept that is tied to contracts, but not an official contract. It's an unofficial contract. It's more of like this commitment this commitment that took place, and one party relied on it, and to that rely to because they relied on it, now they're in a little bit of a detriment. They're in a bad situation because they relied on your particular the new company's particular promise, and
Yeah.
that can still make the new company liable because
Mhm.
because they essentially they declined to continue that offer of employment. Uh, and I think that that's an area where businesses aren't too informed about. They just think it's this offer and acceptance. Well, I can retract the offer, whenever I want to. Yes, it sucks, but no harm, no foul. But the actual
Mhm.
thing is there is harm because that person no longer has the job anymore that they left because of that new company's commitment to them.
What about if business understood that they don't have budget anymore for this role, or they don't require this role, and it was just like in the from the beginning it shouldn't have never been hired for? In that scenarios, and we hired somebody, what would we do?
Right. So that's a legitimate reason to go ahead and separate from someone. To simply say
Okay.
we don't have a budget. We don't have the budget for the position. It's not based on
Right.
any protected category. It's just a budget thing. So we are eliminating the position. Um, and it's important. What's important there is that it's the elimination of a position and not an elimination of the person.
Yes.
Whereas,
Yeah.
yeah, so that layoff, the idea of the layoff is the idea of we're eliminating positions. We are cutting all these positions from our payroll records. Whereas most of the time when you terminate someone, it's we're keeping all of these positions here. We're just replacing the person.
Yeah.
And so
I
go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a scenario question
Mhm.
on that since we touched on the layoffs. So we're seeing a lot of trend these days that a lot of big companies since 2023 or 2024 has been massively laying people off. And before it was like a big thing, like, oh my God, this company is tanking and they're laying people off. Now it's like a trend that, oh, they're laying people off. I guess it's like a cool thing, I guess. Like, they're reducing the employee count and they're saying as a flex that we're going to use AI and everything. So, how can employees protect themselves from this? And another thing that I've noticed on the flip side that they either hire somebody within 3 months for the similar role. They realize that, you know what, I want to lay off first. And then they're like, oh no, we need that person. So let's just open a role. Or we don't need that particular person. So I'm just going to label it as layoff and just, cut them from
Yeah,
the company.
that
Yeah.
label as a layoff, and then to reopen the position. So from the from the employee perspective, right, they're going to receive some type of layoff letter saying, "Oh, we're laying you off," and then 3 months down the line, you're on LinkedIn and you see that same position reopen again. That is the kind of the first initial step of something that's a little bit problematic, because where a layoff is eliminating positions, the employee or even the employee's attorney may start to raise the question: was this really a layoff of an elimination of a position, or was it really about the person? And if it's really and if it's really about the person, then we have to question essentially why was it a layoff? Why label it a layoff if it was about the person? And then two, well, what is it about the person? And so that what is it about the person starts to raise questions about those protected categories. And then you have to start looking at personnel records and things like that to identify whether there were any complaints, or whether there were um, comments that may have been made about protected categories. And so
Interesting.
for the HR for the HR professionals, it is it's understanding understanding the difference between a layoff and a termination, and two, being very sure, very sure, and make sure to communicate with leadership that we're not planning to reopen this position. And I think, and maybe leadership it doesn't always know the difference between a layoff and a termination. And so,
Mhm.
as an HR professional, communicating, so we're not planning on reopening this position. Because if we're not planning on reopening the position, then fine, we can go ahead and eliminate the position and do a layoff. But if there is a sense that we're going to reopen this position, then it's going to be critical for the company to just communicate why we're separating from the employee, whether they weren't
Mhm.
whether the work was not up to par, up to the particular standard, um, or if there were other issues just within the workplace. Then it's more likely that we just need to actually communicate to the employee why the separation is taking place, or coach, because the coaching allows, when you coach, it allows the employee to see, where their mistakes are. And I kind of like to take this framing when it comes to coaching. Does someone want to continue doing the job poorly, or would they want to
Yeah.
know about it?
Mhm.
And most time they would want to know about it, and therefore I think that can help the HR professional kind of decrease some of the stress when it comes to those confrontations with the employee. Hey, I can assume that the employee wants to know that the job that they're doing isn't accurate, and so now I'm going to a coaching mode versus this disciplinary mode, because I want to inform this person that what they're doing is not accurate.
Yeah. And this is why it's extremely important to train as HR BPs or HR managers needs to, as major role for us is to coach managers on how to coach and do a lot of trainings.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. And I think with HR has this particular stigma that, oh, you're only coming around when there's something bad. And I'd probably put more of the responsibility of the coaching on the management versus the HR, but the HR can point out to the manager that, hey, the coaching here can actually assist this person with knowing what they actually need to perform their jobs, and can help essentially move that product or service along. Right, it's the manager's responsibility to help the employee perform to their best ability so that it can move that product or service forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest responsibility that we have is to provide those tools to managers and how to do that.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so managers and doing a termination for the first time, or even trying to correct someone's performance, it can be there's an emotional component behind it, which is completely understandable. But I think that if you enter the situation not from a disciplinary point of view versus a coaching and versus a coaching point of view, I think it can be less emotional of emotional hurdle.
Yeah. And as we're talking about these common employment law issues that we're seeing in the companies, you have like revised hundreds of handbooks for companies. So I'm curious to know, what are the other areas that you have noticed that recurring employment law issues you notice that show up again and again in companies, and what caused them?
Yeah, I think what shows up again and again is um, one, you have inappropriate contact. I think you're at a workplace, and the idea you're there 40 hours a week, and that's you spend a majority of your time there, and you start to build relationships. And some people have had good relationships, developed a intimate relationship with a coworker because they saw each other 40 hours a week. It's just really risky. It's just extremely risky. And once someone says they no longer want to be in a relationship, that's where the problems can arise. And so I think that the inappropriate contact uh, during workplace is a high area. Disability accommodations is another high area where life happens, whether it's a workplace injury, an out of workplace injury, it could be a birth of a child. And so all of these areas come into play, and employees need some assistance there. They need some assistance to be able to perform the functions of their job. And so that's where the accommodations ultimately come into play. And so as a HR professional, as a even as a manager, we want to make sure that the employee has what they need to perform their job. And so sometimes that can mean small accommodations to help them perform their job. Now, those small accommodations, what can happen with those are they can feel a little bit burdensome. Anytime you think about a SOP that you have, and you're trying to go through the SOP, you have a little bit of pacing because you've been doing it, you've been doing it regularly. In injury, it slows that down. It slows that process down, which is understandable. Now, it's frustrating for the person who is who has the injury. The manager may see, oh, now my entire team has slowed down, and we're not going to hit our goals as fast. And so it has this feeling of like a ripple effect, but really that is a point in the employee's life where they might be struggling, and it's also an area where the employee is going to recognize who was there to support them. I remember when I worked for a previous company, and I had my daughter. She's now 4, but I had her. I was able to bring my daughter into work, and since I was on a computer, talk on the phone with businesses, it was a difficult time period. But because that employer was there to support, and allowed me to work at a slower pace, but still make sure I got my stuff done. I just worked at a slower pace. That actually sits better with me, and the the other employees around me can see that that employer cares for their life situation that took place. And sometimes I think that employers don't always take into account how a situation looks to the rest of the employees. I've talked to a lot of business owners, and an employee may may be pregnant, may become pregnant, and immediately that employer is saying, oh well, they're going to take a leave of absence, and months down the line, and I'm not going to be able to find someone to come in here and make an accommodation or fill in while they're out. And so like I was pointing out, because of those time periods within that person's life that arise, they're going to look at that and see how the employer handled that, and the other employees in the area are going to say, well, if I get pregnant, then what's going to stop them from treating me the same way? I'm just going to leave before any of that takes place.
Oh my God, that's such a great example, honestly. And because everyone go through something, breakup, divorce, having a child, or having going through depression, or having an injury. There's so many things that could happen in our lives. And even though the employee is working at a slower pace and have a lower productivity than normal, it actually improves retention, improves the morale, improves other people mental health. Like, okay, the employee cares about me, so I want to contribute, I want to come more to the work, I care more about the work.
Mhm.
Versus if they say like, okay, no, I just need to cut the employee off and get over, move on, then that actually overall reduces the productivity, because none of the employee feels like, okay, I need feel mentally checked out.
Mhm.
And I think that's what happening to too a lot of times these days, because of the layoffs and the trends. Employees are feeling that, okay, I'm just a um, another person that you would replace tomorrow, or maybe replace me with an AI. So it's actually a very great example you shared. I want to go to the next question about how can HR teams create a culture where employees feel safe to report issues when they face early instead of coming later, so we can de-escalate them and do not run into any legal or reputational risk.
Yeah, I think employee engagement is huge, and um, uh, getting an understanding of what your employees feel about the position, how they feel like the processes for moving that product or service along are actually impacting them. Do they have everything that they need in order to move that product or service along faster? So really having that employee engagement, I think, is very critical, because you can learn things, uh, such as if the employee have various complaints, by doing that employee engagement. Uh, I also think having one-on-ones with employees is very critical. The one-on-ones now, depending on the size of the organization, a one-on-one uh, can make sense. I think particularly for small organizations, one-on-ones are necessary, because it one allows the manager and the employee to not only talk about work, but talk about kind of, hey, what'd you do over the weekend? How'd you spend your time? What do you like? Um, how do you how do you like to be rewarded? Right? What are those things that you do? You like open praisal, but like saying in a group chat, thank you Halisi for all that you do, in the group chat? Or do you just like maybe a card to signal that the manager saw the work that you did? So I think one-on-ones can afford that, and having that kind of constant communication, it just helps ultimately build a relationship. And then you also can create the culture by making sure that employees know a place that they can express their concerns at. It's not just saying, "Hey, I have this open door policy. Come into my office whenever you want," because in order for that to take place, you need a relationship for someone to you need to have a good relationship for someone to come into your office and just say, "Hey, this is what took place. I'm feeling unsafe." So a relationship needs to be there. So having a specific written form that an employee can fill out, that they know that this is a concern form that they're able to fill out, report a concern that they have, is is also critical. Now, once they take that form, the question is, who are they taking that form to? And if you only have one person that you're taking that form to, then the employee may feel uncomfortable about going to that one person. Maybe that one person is the person that they actually have the concern about. And so the informing the employee that there are multiple people, multiple options. If the one person that you would normally take it to, you're uncomfortable or you're not feeling safe, then make sure that they know that there's another option for them to go ahead and have their concern reviewed or addressed. And so multiple people to report to, the employee concern policy, one-on-ones, and employee engagement, I think, are tools that create a safe working environment.
Honestly, I think you covered it all. I often observe that managers are a lot of workload, that they do not have time at all to do one on ones, or they do not have training on how to do one on ones, what questions to ask, even, or they don't have training how to coach people or listen to their concerns. They're just too busy with their work. And these days, I've also noticed workplace has become a lot of transactional relationships, not really like, okay, tell me what's going on, like, so I think this is where a lot of managers have to work on in order to ensure the issues are, we are hearing their voice. And one thing I noticed with scheduled one-on-one is that member don't feel obligated. If they feel something and it's small, they don't come up and share it. But if it's a one-on-one which is scheduled, they automatically open up because they have to, there's a space for them to talk about smallest to biggest things. So that's another thing I noticed which has been super helpful, having these check-in meetings. And another few things that I've observed which has been helpful is employee hotline, which you also mentioned,
Mm.
or some kind of form where you can take those concerns. um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Having a hotline there, whether it's like an anonymous hotline, I think that is also in area for employees to just feel comfortable. Hey, I don't feel comfortable face to face, so I'm just going to call in and report the concern.
Yeah. And what about like conflicts? I want to talk a little bit about once the issue we didn't realize and it just people started having conflict at the workplace. What is the best way for us when it escalated? What is the first step that we need to do in investigation, and how can we de-escalate it?
Yeah,
Also, in during the process, how can we be more objective and empathetic?
yeah, yeah. The objective and empathetic is a great question. I think with the workplace, the kind of the first step, and I think this can actually help with the empathetic portion is it safe, right? Because if we can make a safe workplace, then that's the goal, right? That's the high level goal is, so someone reports a concern, and we want to know, is it currently safe? Because we can still talk to people, we can still talk to witnesses and whatnot, but is it currently safe? So making sure the work environment safe. Is there like an after hour, like not an after hours, but a later shift that two people work on where it just feels like it's unsafe, right? We may need to switch that so that the two people aren't working together. That's the kind of the safety we want to kind of quickly eliminate, so that we can make sure that we're addressing the issue. And we want to make sure that those safety issues are being eliminated, but we're not retaliating against the person at the same time. So the person who makes the complaint, well, now we're shifting them to a different department, right? So it can feel like, because we're shifting them to a different department, that we're trying to make the situation safe, but shifting them to a different department can also appear retaliatory. And so in order to kind of overcome that, it's talking to the person who's making the allegation and getting a sense of what they would like to see at that point in time. Hey, you know what? I'm coming to you because the coworker that I'm working with, it feels unsafe. They said X, Y, and Z to me. Okay, now I want to talk to them about All right. Well, thank you for making the thank you for expressing your concern. You two work on the same shift. What do you see? We're gonna. I want to address this, but I also want to make sure that we immediately address the safety situation. Do you feel most comfortable having me change their shift, or do you feel comfortable changing your shift? And so now we have options on the table, and now that employee is
Mhm.
selecting the direction. Maybe they say, "Yep, you know what? Change my shift. That's fine." And now it's not a retaliation conversation.
Okay, I have an on that. I have a quick follow up.
Mhm.
What if it is a manager and an employee? Because that's more often is the conflict of a manager is like being bossy or being rude to me, or I'm unable to like just stay in the team at all. And there's no other team. It's a small business. It's let's say it's a marketing team or operations team, and there's only one manager who's doing it. How can we create safety in that place where it's smaller team?
Yeah, smaller teams. Great question. I think it also is. It's going to be a little bit difficult for smaller teams, but there are leave of absences for investigation
Mhm.
purposes. Right. That's very
Interesting.
critical that you're saying for investigation purposes, not sending a person home. And if there is a leave of absence for an investigation purpose, you still want to make sure that person's getting paid. So they're getting
Mhm.
paid. They're on a paid leave for investigation purposes. So the employee has not been adversely impacted, maybe because they're at home, but and they're still getting paid. And so we want to make sure that we've put all of those options essentially on the table. And you want to talk about those options with the employee to see what makes sense. Because if you just start to send them home, then that's also going to look like a little bit of retaliation. Um, and it may make sense to put the manager on a leave based on investigation purposes, and still that manager should still also be getting paid. And I think it, employees can be confused why someone is still getting paid when they're on leave, and it can cause a little bit of frustration. And I hope this conversation can help break some of that frustration. That when someone's on a leave of absence and they're still getting paid, and it's like, they're the ones who did the allegation against me, and they go home and they're getting paid. It's like they're getting a reward. They can feel like they're
Mhm.
getting a reward for what they've done, and I can understand that. Um, and but at the same time, when you haven't gone through a an investigation process, you also don't want to be taking money out of someone's pocket, and that's based on an allegation. And
Yes.
so that can help make sure that everything is still whole. People still have their bills paid, and that we still have an investigation process to go through. But it can just help kind of set the ground that we're trying to be consistent as an organization. We're not trying to put people in worse situations just because we received an allegation. And
Mhm.
um, so there are options that are available to them. You just want to sit down and make sure you're communicating what those options are, and making sure the person who's making the allegation is not feeling isolated because of any recent changes. So communication is key in those situations.
Yeah. And one other thing I know I learned from a lot of employees who have concerns and shared that they always want HR to ask them, well, how would they like the process to go?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, and that's one thing of when you talk about understanding the circumstances. So we talk about the safety concerns and making sure the the environment is safe, particularly during the investigation process. We also want to understand the dynamics that are there. Is this employee to employee? Is this supervisor to employee? Is there a conflict of interest? Kind of like you pointed out that there's a manager who's overseeing the employee, and that's where the conflict is. So there's a little bit of a conflict of interest. So we really want to understand those dynamics from the start. Once you kind of identify the safety concerns and dynamics, then we can start to say, okay, let's understand the circumstances. We got to meet with the alleged victim. So you're getting their point of view on what's taken place. They'll inform you. But one thing I want to highlight is this a single or is this multiple occurrences? Has this continually happened, or is this the first time the situation has occurred? And I think asking those questions from the employee, it can feel uncomfortable from the start. But I think once the employee kind of goes through the process, oh, this is multiple occurrences. It's happened on A, B, and situations. And then you also want to identify who else has witnessed the particular behavior, so that you as the HR or the manager is able to go out and talk to those people who have seen the behaviors that are here, who have witnessed the behaviors. And then I do agree with you, um, asking asking the employee what they would like to see completed and what they would like to see done. And from the HR's perspective, or from the manager's perspective, it's you can they can communicate that, you know, that yes, I want to know. Yes, I want to know what you would like to see done. What's going to make you feel safe in this situation? So how would you like to see the situation handled? But as the employee is not um, always kind of considering the functions of the business at all points in time. And so what the employee wants is important, but it may not always be what is best. And I think that separating those two pieces out is important, because you want to get the employee's point of view, on where they're at, but you also want to make sure that you're staying legally compliant and consistent with your practice policies. So, so yeah, getting that report from the alleged victim is important, and then sitting down with the rest of the team who's making the decisions to say, how close are we able to get to what this employee is looking for.
So while this is all happening, what would we communicate to the rest of the team? Because they would have like a lot of questions. Like they notice a lot of things are going on. They don't know what's happening, and so what would be the best way to communicate to them to ensure there's no chaos
I
with
mean,
it?
I think we all have a level of privacy that we don't want to expose. So I think that's important. So because an employee gets injured, or because an employee you know expresses a concern that they have, that doesn't necessarily mean they want it exposed to the entire company. And so while other coworkers may see that there's a lot of moving pieces that are taking place, it is important to respect the person's privacy who made the allegation. And so now, so there's a responsibility to keep certain information confidential. Now, you can't keep all the coworkers necessarily in the dark on everything, but you can create an understanding. Hey, if this was, we as a business want to make sure that not all sensitive information is being exposed. We wouldn't expose that for this employee, and if you were in the same situation, we wouldn't expose that for you, unless you gave us permission, you wanted us to expose it. There's a kind of a standard baseline with confidentiality that's there, and I think that once that gets communicated to the coworkers, then most coworkers are also like, okay, right, there's certain information about myself I don't want exposed, that I don't want the company exposing, so they typically get that. I just think that it's not often communicated in a way. It's either communicated that it's completely shut down, or it's it's exposed. There's more of a little bit of a happy medium, if you're communicating it to the team.
Gotcha. Moving forward, I think that's such a I've learned a lot in this. Um, I want to give you a scenario right now.
Okay.
Let's say an employee reports discrimination, and after 2 months later, they found out themselves being terminated for performance. What red flags should HR look for here, and how should we approach investigating it?
Yeah. So for the first one, the reason why the person's terminated is important, and we want to understand that if the person was terminated for something that was egregious, for lack of a better term, something very serious might be they they took money that was supposed to be for the company. A customer dropped off money, and that employee took the money and pocketed it. Right. That's something that's egregious. So even if the employee reported discrimination previously 2 months prior, this egregious behavior, it makes sense to go ahead and terminate them.
Right.
But if someone reported something 2 months prior, and then we're looking at this termination, and it's for something small, maybe something small is attendance, and being a couple minutes late, maybe it's having their cell phone on them, something small like that that employees typically engage in, that's going to raise a red flag, uh, because they recently reported something serious like a discrimination, and now they're being disciplined for something small, something minute that other employees would typically engage in, and so that becomes
Mhm.
problematic. So that's kind of the first area where I would take a look at. The next area I would take a look at would be the performance issues, and this is where I would take a look at the type of coaching. So I
Mhm.
would look to say, was there coaching prior to the report of discrimination, and was there coaching after? So if there was no coaching prior, and coaching all of a sudden starts after they report a discrimination, then that's a red flag. If there was coaching prior to the report of discrimination, well, now we're looking at, is this a continued behavior? If it's a continued behavior that they were already aware of prior to reporting this discrimination, it may be fine to go ahead and separate from them, because you're really pointing out an issue that took place long before this report of discrimination, and so it may be okay.
Mhm.
Um, and that's where the documentation becomes very helpful and very useful, and coaching is encouraged, so that, because if you do it only after a report of discrimination, then it's going to become problematic, and it's going to look like you've only started retaliating against this person because they reported this discrimination.
Wow. Um, so there's so many situations, XYZ situations that we need to consider before we move forward, is what I understood. And um, lastly, I have one important question to ask.
Yeah.
So we talked about a lot of interesting topics, and I think they're very generic, and all of them point out to how we should not be unfairly treating people. And no matter whether they're in US, Canada, or Australia, there must be some kind of law that we're protecting employees or employees from. So I think this episode has been very helpful in that way to be more aware of situations like workplace conflicts, or understanding your compliance. How do we hire properly? How do we offer them properly, and everything? So I want to close with one last question, asking what resources or links would you suggest for HR to constantly keep up to date with how employment law is changing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tools that are out there. I think, one, kind of just being aware, pay attention, kind of the news articles within your region.
Mm-hmm.
If there are changes within the employment laws. So just kind of keeping a lookout there. But there's podcasts. There's a podcast called Employment Law Now podcast
Mhm.
that I'll typically take a listen to. And there's also a podcast called What the Hell Just Happened. It's a
Wow.
great podcast for HR professionals, and it gives a really down to earth, non kind of legalese conversation about HR, and so it's a really great podcast to take a look at.
Awesome. I'm going to link all of those podcasts and resources down below, along with your LinkedIn and your website. So all the listeners can reach out to you anytime, connect with you, and learn more. So, yeah, we almost at the end of the session. Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure. I learned a lot. And being in HR, like we all start somewhere. We won't have all the areas of understanding. I started in recruitment and then into employee engagement, but never got into deep into employee relations or employment law. So, talking with you, understanding more on um, area where I need to be more aware of and doing things has been super helpful, and it actually gave me a lot of information that I need to follow up on to learn more. So I really appreciate it. This has been a great episode, and I thank you for all the time.
Thank you for having me, Vara. And one thing, so I came in from the my using my legal background, and you mentioned all these other areas that where you start at, and speaking with other HR professionals helps me in my even in my empathetic area. And so it's actually been a very good relationship with myself and just other HR professionals, because there are a lot of things that you just don't particularly understand, or just see how people interact with one another. So so this has been great. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Thank